The wind came down from the mountains in long, cold breaths, carrying the scent of pine needles and distant rain. It moved through the trees with a sound that reminded Jeremiah Boone of whispers. Most people found the mountain lonely. Jeremiah preferred it that way. His cabin stood on a rocky slope several miles from the nearest town. It was small but sturdy, built with his own hands many years ago. The porch sagged slightly on one side, and the roof bore scars from countless winters, but it kept the snow out and the warmth in. That was enough. Jeremiah was 56 years old and had lived alone for nearly 2 decades. His beard had turned gray long ago, and the lines around his eyes had deepened from years spent squinting into sunlight and storms. He rarely spoke to anyone except the storekeeper in town and occasionally the mail carrier. The quiet suited him. At least, that was what he told himself. That Saturday morning, he drove his aging pickup truck into town to buy supplies. The monthly farmers' market had drawn a larger crowd than usual. People wandered between stalls selling vegetables, homemade bread, and handmade crafts. Children laughed as they chased one another through the square. Jeremiah parked near the edge of the market and gathered his shopping list. As he walked past the stalls, something unusual caught his attention. A crowd had gathered near the old courthouse steps. People were talking loudly. Some were laughing. Others simply watched. Jeremiah frowned. He wasn't the kind of man who enjoyed crowds, but something about the scene felt wrong. Slowly, he moved closer. At the center stood a young woman in expensive clothes. Her sunglasses rested on top of her head, and her expression carried an air of impatience. Beside her stood an elderly woman. The older woman looked frail. Her silver hair was tied back loosely. Her coat was worn and too thin for the chilly weather. She clutched a small suitcase whose corners were frayed from years of use. The contrast between the two women was impossible to miss. The younger woman looked polished and comfortable. The older woman looked exhausted. "What exactly is going on?" Jeremiah asked a man standing nearby. The man shook his head. "Craziest thing I've ever seen." "What?" "That young woman says she's done taking care of her mother." Jeremiah stared. "What do you mean?" The man pointed toward the courthouse steps. "She's trying to get someone else to take her." Jeremiah thought he had misheard. Then he listened. The young woman raised her voice. "Look, I can't keep doing this." The elderly woman lowered her eyes. The daughter continued. "She needs constant attention. Medical appointments. Help around the house. I have my own life." Murmurs spread through the crowd. Some people looked uncomfortable. Others simply watched. The older woman remained silent. Jeremiah felt a knot tighten in his chest. A memory surfaced. His own mother sitting beside a fireplace years ago. Her tired smile. Her gentle voice. The memory disappeared as quickly as it came. The daughter crossed her arms. "I've spent enough money already." An older man from the crowd stepped forward. "She's your mother." The daughter rolled her eyes. "Easy for you to say." The crowd grew quieter. Then the daughter did something that left everyone speechless. She reached into her purse and pulled out a $20 bill. Holding it in the air, she laughed bitterly. "Honestly, if someone wants to take her, they can have her for $20. The word seemed to freeze the air. No one moved. No one spoke. The elderly woman's shoulders sank slightly. It wasn't the reaction of someone surprised. It was the reaction of someone who had already been hurt too many times. Jeremiah felt anger rise inside him. Not loud anger. The kind that settled deep and heavy. The daughter looked around. "Well?" Nobody answered. The silence stretched. Then Jeremiah stepped forward. The crowd parted. The daughter looked at him. "You interested?" Jeremiah studied her face. He searched for some sign of regret. Some hint that this was a cruel joke. He found nothing. His gaze shifted to the elderly woman. Her eyes were filled with embarrassment. Not for herself. For her daughter. That somehow hurt even more. "What is your name, ma'am?" Jeremiah asked gently. The woman hesitated. "Margaret." Her voice was soft. Jeremiah nodded. "I'm Jeremiah." Margaret managed a faint smile. The daughter sighed dramatically. "So? Are you taking her or not?" Jeremiah reached into his wallet. The crowd watched in stunned silence. He removed a $20 bill. The daughter smirked. But Jeremiah wasn't looking at her. He handed the bill over without a word. The daughter grabbed it immediately. A few people gasped. Others shook their heads in disbelief. The entire scene felt unreal. Yet it was happening. The daughter folded the money and slipped it into her purse. "There." She shrugged. Problem solved. Margaret looked as though she might cry. "Emily." The daughter avoided her gaze. "I have to go." For a brief moment, Jeremiah thought she might change her mind. Perhaps she would apologize. Perhaps she would remember who this woman was. The one who had raised her. Protected her. Loved her. Instead, Emily turned and walked away. She didn't look back once. The crowd remained silent. Margaret stood motionless, watching her daughter disappear. Jeremiah noticed her hands trembling. After several long seconds, he spoke quietly. "Would you like some coffee?" Margaret blinked. The simple kindness seemed to surprise her. "Coffee sounds nice." He nodded. "Then let's start there." They walked to a nearby diner. The crowd slowly dispersed behind them. Inside, the warmth wrapped around them immediately. A waitress brought coffee and soup. Margaret thanked her twice. Jeremiah noticed everything. The careful way she folded her napkin. The way she apologized whenever she felt she might be inconveniencing someone. The sadness she tried so hard to hide. As they ate, he learned pieces of her story. She was 78. Her husband had passed away 12 years earlier. She had worked as a school librarian for most of her life. After suffering health problems, she had moved in with Emily. At first, things were fine. Then gradually they changed. The complaints began. The arguments followed. Eventually, Margaret felt less like family and more like a burden. She spoke calmly. Without bitterness. That was what struck Jeremiah most. She never once insulted her daughter. Even now. Even after what had happened. When lunch ended, Jeremiah stared out the diner window. Rain clouds had gathered over the mountains. "You have somewhere to go?" he asked. Margaret hesitated. Then slowly shook her head. "No." The answer hung between them. Simple. Honest. Heartbreaking. Jeremiah looked at the approaching storm. Then at the elderly woman sitting across from him. For years, he had lived alone. For years, he had convinced himself he needed nobody. Yet sitting there, he felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Purpose. He cleared his throat. "Margaret." "Yes?" "My cabin isn't fancy." She smiled weakly. "I don't need fancy. The roof leaks a little during heavy storms. I've seen worse." A faint smile appeared on Jeremiah's face. "Good." Margaret looked at him curiously. Jeremiah took a slow breath. Then he said the words that would change both of their lives forever. "You can stay as long as you need." Margaret's eyes widened. For a moment she couldn't speak. And outside, the first drops of rain began to fall from the dark mountain sky. The rain began softly at first, tapping against the diner window like hesitant fingers. Outside, the mountain road shimmered under the growing storm, the headlights of passing trucks stretching into long golden streaks. Margaret sat very still, as if afraid that any movement might break the moment. "You can stay as long as you need," Jeremiah had said. The words didn't feel real to her. People didn't say things like that anymore. Not without expecting something in return. Her hands tightened around the edge of the table. "I don't want to be a burden." Jeremiah gave a small, almost tired shake of his head. "Then don't be." That simple answer confused her more than comforted her. For the first time in years, Margaret didn't know what was expected of her. Outside, thunder rolled softly over the mountains. By the time they left the diner, the rain had thickened into steady sheets. Jeremiah helped her into his old truck without making a fuss about it, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Margaret noticed the cracked leather seats, the faint smell of pine and oil, and the way the vehicle struggled slightly when it started. It wasn't impressive. But it felt safe. The drive up the mountain was slow. The road curved sharply in places, winding through tall pines that bent under the weight of the storm. Margaret watched the world blur past her window, thinking about the last time she had been inside a vehicle without feeling anxious. Years. Maybe longer. At some point, Jeremiah turned on the radio. Soft static filled the silence between them, followed by an old country song playing faintly through the speaker. He didn't speak much. And strangely, that made it easier for Margaret to breathe. When they finally reached the cabin, dusk had fallen. The rain made the wooden structure look darker, almost like it was part of the mountain itself. A small light glowed in one of the windows. Jeremiah parked and walked around to open her door. "Careful," he said, offering his hand again. Margaret hesitated only a moment before taking it. The warmth of his grip surprised her. It wasn't the careful, reluctant touch she had grown used to from her daughter when helping her move. It was steady. Certain. Like he wasn't afraid of her weight, or her age, or her presence. Inside the cabin, a fire was already burning. The warmth hit Margaret immediately, sinking into her bones in a way she hadn't realized she needed. Jeremiah set her small suitcase near the wall. "You can take the room by the window," he said. "It gets the most light in the morning." "I can sleep on a couch," she replied quickly. He gave her a look that wasn't unkind, but firm. "You won't." That was the end of the argument. That night, Margaret lay in a real bed for the first time in months. The sheets were clean but slightly rough, the mattress old but supportive. Outside, the rain continued to fall, but the cabin held steady against it. For a long time, she simply listened. Not to the storm, but to the silence that didn't feel threatening. Downstairs, Jeremiah sat by the fire longer than usual. He stared into the flames as if they were answering questions he hadn't spoken out loud. He told himself this was temporary. Just until she got back on her feet. Just until something else happened. But deep down, he knew he didn't believe that. Days passed. Then weeks. Life in the cabin slowly changed shape. Margaret began helping with small things. At first, Jeremiah resisted her attempts, insisting she rest. But she insisted just as quietly back. She folded laundry. Washed dishes. Learned where he kept everything in the kitchen. And slowly, the house stopped feeling like it belonged to one person. Mornings became predictable in a way neither of them commented on. Jeremiah would light the stove. Margaret would make tea. Sometimes they would sit by the window and watch the fog lift from the trees. She told him stories without realizing she was doing it. About the library where she had worked for 30 years. About children who used to come in after school, hiding in corners with books twice their size. About her husband, who used to fix broken shelves just to have an excuse to visit her during work hours. Jeremiah listened more than he spoke. But when he did speak, it was never wasted. One evening, as autumn began to settle over the mountains, Margaret stood by the porch watching the trees shift in the wind. "I keep thinking about her," she said quietly. Jeremiah, who was chopping wood nearby, slowed his hands. "Your daughter?" Margaret nodded. The word daughter felt strange in her mouth now, like something that no longer fit properly. "I wonder if she's angry," she added. Jeremiah didn't answer immediately. He placed another log on the stack before speaking. "She gave up the right to demand anything from you." Margaret flinched slightly at the bluntness, though she knew he wasn't trying to hurt her. "I keep thinking I did something wrong," she admitted. Jeremiah finally looked at her. "No," he said simply. "You didn't." The certainty in his voice made her eyes sting. But she didn't cry. Not yet. 2 months passed. Winter came early that year. One morning, Margaret didn't come down for breakfast. Jeremiah found her in bed, pale and disoriented. Her breathing was shallow, her hands cold despite the blankets. Without hesitation, he drove her down the mountain. The hospital was small, but the doctors moved quickly. Dehydration. Exhaustion. A weakened heart pushed too far by stress. Nothing immediately life-threatening.